We are live, and welcome, Warrior Goddess Summer Campers, to our next session. I am so excited to share with you another fabulous member of the Warrior Goddess leadership team. Some of you may have already chatted with her and worked with her not this morning, my days went earlier today, we'll say that. And now we all get to share and learn from Ms. CJ Thomas, who's going to walk us through a wonderful session on uplifting all of the warrior goddesses of color in our community. So I am so excited to listen and and to hang out with you for a bit, CJ. So I'm going to make myself disappear, and the floor will be.
Thank you so much, Sparkle, and welcome everybody. I hope that you are having an amazing time at Warrior Goddess Summer Camp. It is so awesome to see this happening. I was there when it was all being dreamed into reality, and to have it really be happening despite all of the odds against us is nothing short of complete magic. So I'm so happy to be part of this today. My name is CJ Thomas. I am a Warrior Goddess training facilitator, level 1, and I'm also part of the Warrior Goddess leadership team. I'm a 200-hour yoga teacher, and I study and practice Ayurveda and women's reproductive health. And I'm here to speak with you today about uplifting people of color in spiritual spaces. And this is a topic that is super near and dear to my heart because most of my life is spent in those sacred spiritual spaces. And I've had so many experiences, which I'll share more about with you in a moment, that have guided me to this place where I realized the importance of educating us all from my own perspective, but how important it is that we all are constantly being educated on ways in which we can create more equity in these wellness spaces, in these sacred spaces where we all come for healing, for nourishment, and to feel in alignment. And so in today's workshop, I will be sharing with you my personal journey as a woman of color in sacred spaces. 6 ways that you yourself can uplift people of color in your own sacred spaces, whether you are just attending them or facilitating them. And at the end of this workshop, we are going to collectively quantum leap into a new reality that upholds equity in spiritual and sacred spaces. So let's go ahead and dive in by just dropping into our energy. I would like to invite you, if you're in the place to do so, to be present in your body. You're welcome to close your eyes if that feels good, or you can soften your gaze, or you can simply just listen. And we're going to start by just taking 3 deep breaths. So inhaling into the belly, into the rib cage, through the chest. And exhale, letting it all go. And then inhaling once again into the belly, maybe deepening your inhale this time, lengthening it out through the rib cage, through the chest. And exhale, release. And one last time, deep inhale into the belly, gathering up any discomfort you may be feeling, any tension you may be feeling with the breath as you inhale, and as you exhale, releasing, maybe with a sigh. And keeping your eyes closed, I imagine you to see yourself, or I invite you to imagine yourself in a space, in a physical space, with all of the participants of this summer camp. And you might imagine them as energy that is present in the room that you're in. And while you can't see everyone's faces, Maybe you see the outlines of bodies or light beams that represent each person in the room. And as we ground into this space with each other, I invite us to hold the collective intention of curiosity for that which brings discomfort, of compassion for ourselves and for each other, and the intention of holding space for anything that comes up as we go through this workshop today. And we're holding space for ourselves and for each other. And when you're ready, taking one last deep breath in and out, gently opening your eyes if they're closed, and coming back into the space. So I want to start off by sharing my story, my journey with you. And I feel that this is incredibly important because when we start to talk about uplifting people of color in sacred spaces, one thing that is incredibly important is hearing their individual stories. When we can hear someone's story, we can start to create a connection to that person. We can start to find ways in which we relate to them. And we start to see them as humans like ourselves. So for me, it hasn't always been easy. Being a woman of color and a teacher of color in a wellness world that is dominated by white bodies is oftentimes challenging. People don't always look like me in my sacred spaces. And as a fierce entrepreneur, as someone who combines her multiple gifts to show up and be of service to the world, I am constantly being called to step into these spaces anyway, even if I feel a little bit uncomfortable. A lot of times this discomfort will show up as anxiety. It will show up as fear and doubt, disbelief in myself and my abilities to teach in a way that is going to be as good as somebody else. It's comparison. It's so many things. And it shows up all the time. No matter how much of my work I do on myself, these things are constantly present. And truthfully, sometimes I just feel like I don't belong. And while this seems like it could be something that has held me back, it has actually become something that has propelled me forward because I've learned how to create space for myself, how to pay attention to the fact that I'm not the only person that shows up in these spaces with these experiences. And I've allowed myself to take my experiences and let it structure the way that I teach and how I show up. And so that also looks like me finding communities where I have allies, women who are white-bodied or people who are white-bodied that support me on my journey and who see me fully for who I am. It's also led me to tap into my own personal practices that help me to feel grounded in my power. And so why I'm sharing all of this with you today is because with the recent happenings in our world, the recent awareness that has been recentered on the Black experience in America and in the world, and all of the riots, the deaths, everything that's been taking place that has triggered this huge awakening, I had to ask myself, what can I do? How can I be of service at this time? How can I show up and do what I can to make a difference? And I realized that education is part of my activism. And because I have been given these gifts and inspirations to show up as a teacher in the world, why not teach about being a person of color in sacred spaces and share my personal ideas on how we can all work together to uplift people of color in sacred spaces. So that is why I came up with 6 different action steps that can all take to lift up people of color in sacred spaces and in spiritual spaces. And I just want to preference this by saying that I am one person, and what I'm sharing with you today is one perspective. However, it is not the perspective, and there is so much that can be learned from so many other people of color in the world, so many other people in general. So I invite you to hold that intention that we set at the beginning of our workshop today and meet everything, meet yourself, meet all of this information with curiosity, hold space, allow yourself to take this journey with me and to question things, to question what comes up within you, whether it's discomfort, and just be present with it all. And then when you walk away from this workshop today, take what you feel serves you and leave what doesn't, and give yourself permission to do that. We are all learning together, and nobody has all of the answers. But I feel like when we come together with this openness and this curiosity to just do something a little bit different than what we're used to step into these undoings, these unlearnings, and open ourselves to creating new ways of being in the world, then we are really living in the warrior goddess way. We're really doing the work. And so that is what I hope you are all taking away from this presentation today. So we'll go ahead and start with the first action step that you can take towards uplifting people of color in sacred spaces. Number 1 is to lift us into leadership. So familiarize yourself with and reach out to women of color or people of color who hold space in your circles, and don't just wait for them to come to you. And I apologize, I'm kind of stumbling over my words today, so bear with me. But yes, so reaching out to people of color to hold space in your circles and not just waiting for them to come to you. So this is something that's specifically for people who create circles, whether you are a warrior goddess facilitator, maybe you hold women's circles, maybe you teach classes of any kind, and you may be in a space where predominantly the teachers are white, or you just don't see a lot of teachers of color. I'm inviting you to reach out to do your research, to find those facilitators of color and invite them into your spaces. And not from a place of tokenization or forcing yourself to create diversity, but from a place of honoring and understanding that bringing these people into your spaces is what truly creates diversity. When you open up to allowing different voices to speak and hold space. Another thing that's really important when you're doing this is making sure that you are equally paying everyone for their time and energy. And also promoting and learning from us just as much as you promote and learn from white-bodied people in your communities. And so this looks like, going to a class that's held, or a workshop or retreat or whatever it is that's held by a person of color or somebody that doesn't look like you. And when you get a service from someone of color, promoting them just as much as you might share and promote a person who is of white body. And this one to me is really important because typically when I'm doing interviews in the world, or looking at, going out and applying for different workshops and festivals and things like that, I notice that the people that tend to get picked are the people who have a larger following, and they also tend to be white-bodied people. And there is something that there's a link there because of the way the different products of oppression and different biases that people have, there tends to be more of a following for white-bodied people. And so the way that we can work on uplifting people of color in our sacred spaces is just remembering to promote people who don't always have the biggest following, but may have something really valuable to share, and promoting people of color and sharing when you've had a really beautiful experience with someone of color. And number 2 is don't speak for us, but let us have our voice. So this is really important because especially when we start to tap into this energy of feeling, outraged by the oppression that we see in the world, there can be this desire to want to stand up for people of color. And it's a beautiful thing, but we have to remember that if we're going to even the playing field, we have to allow people of color to stand up for themselves. And that just looks like holding space and providing a platform. Allow us to have our space to share our wisdom and our experiences. And instead of listening to respond, and this can even come down to just being in conversation with people of color in sacred spaces, instead of listening to respond, sometimes it's more important to just listen, just hold space. Something that I think every person can work on is allowing people to speak and be fully heard. Now, as a person of color, I constantly experience this thing where I'll be talking and I'll get cut off midway through what I'm saying. And sometimes it feels as though my words aren't as important. Or if I'm involved in an uncomfortable conversation around race, for example, there's this urgency for someone to defend themselves or to make sure that they are not appearing a certain way. And when that happens, that space holding, it kind of is weakened. And so there's something really powerful to just being able to listen and allow someone to share their perspective. And then know that you'll have a moment in time where you get to share your perspective. And that when we allow for this space and communication, it also leaves room for deep growth. And so number 3 is to do your work, do your research. If you aren't familiar with the history of systemic oppression, it's important to familiarize yourself with that history. Familiarize yourself with ways in which oppression, supremacy, and racism still influence our society today. It's really hard to do this work sometimes. It can be very triggering. It can bring the oil to the surface. It can be very uncomfortable, but it's powerful because when we can understand what systemic racism and oppression and supremacy really looks like, we can start to see the ways in which it has shaped our own implicit bias. And then we can start to work with that and say, okay, because of these different ways in which these aspects have shown up in my systems and in my community have affected me, I may be showing up a certain way in my sacred spaces or in any space, and I just don't know that I'm doing it because it's subconscious. And so if you're able to familiarize yourself with what oppression looks like on a larger scale, you can start to familiarize yourself with the different seeds that may have been planted into your own psyche that dictate the way that you move forward in the world, that you present yourself in the world, that you show up. And when you're doing this, it's so important to tap into compassion, because if you start to notice things in yourself, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It's not an invitation to start placing judgment on yourself or really on anybody else. It's just awareness. And when you have that awareness, you're able to work with the things that you're aware of in an even more malleable way. And another thing that goes into doing your own work is knowing when to do your own emotional labor. So as you start to learn more and become more awakened to things, it starts to stimulate discomfort within us. Those cracks begin to open, the wounds begin to open, and it can be really hard. And what tends to happen is there is this idea that, well, maybe I need to go to my friends of color and have them hold space for me and for everything that I'm experiencing right now, and apologize to them and tell them about my experience. And while your experience is incredibly valid, something that's important to remember when we talk about emotional labor is the fact that what you may be awakening to is the lived experience of some people every single day. And so when we're in these sacred spaces and we're asking people to hold space for our process without considering where they are in their own process, it can be harmful. And it can be something that, instead of promoting growth, it can actually stunt growth sometimes. And so we want to make sure that we're holding space for ourselves. We're doing our warrior goddess training work to do the work within ourselves, to do our own emotional labor. And then we can come back to these conversations from that grounded place where we're able to hold space and bring about change. And the last one here is just, instead of asking us what you can do, ask your heart and trust the answer. And when I say us, I mean people of color. So, for example, when George Floyd passed and when the riots began to happen, I had a lot of white bodied people in my community coming to me asking what they could do. And in that moment, I didn't even know what I was going to do myself. I had to really sit with everything that was going on and process. And I realized that if I am able to sit with my own heart and with my own intuition and ask myself, what can I do? Then so are they. And so it's really important that we trust that we are connected to something so much greater than ourselves. And we receive this beautiful divine intuition and messaging all the time. And when we get quiet enough, we can hear it and we'll be met with the answers that we're looking for. So that all of that falls into the category of doing your own work. Number 4, the fourth action step, is to resist cultural appropriation. So understanding the difference between honoring and taking the culture of others is incredibly important when we talk about cultural appropriation. And it's important to also acknowledge that, yes, like looking at the practices of other people's lineages is amazing. There are some really beautiful things that have been channeled through the people in our history from spirit. And the way that people do ritual and the way that people pray can be really inspirational and beautiful, and it's absolutely worthy of respect. But when we start to take it on as our own, when we start to benefit from it, when we start to wear it as a costume, then that creates harm. So making sure that you're understanding the difference between honoring and culture sharing as opposed to cultural appropriation is incredibly important. And in that same line, look at how you can embrace your own cultural rituals and maybe even create new rituals. Something that I learned from Heather Ash Amara is that we actually have the ability to create our own rituals and to work with the elements and come up with a new way of working our magic in this world. And so how can you tap into, once again, your intuition and the information that you're receiving and from spirit or, the divine or whatever you want to call it, and how can you create new rituals? And making sure that if you are, like, for instance, I'm a yoga teacher, and so this is always a conversation I'm having within myself, but, how can you embrace your teachings and make sure that you're giving credit where credit is due? And number 5 is going to be calling in and holding space. So when you're calling in and holding space in the sense of creating your own offerings, whether you're a facilitator or you're holding a women's circle or whatever it is that you do, if you're a teacher, how can you call in and hold space for all people of color? By making your offerings accessible. Maybe accessibility looks like offering scholarships. Maybe it looks like making sure that translators or interpreters are present. Maybe it looks like making sure that your messaging is all inclusive. Maybe it looks like offering something online because not everybody can make it in person, or offering a free offering or a community funded offering. So calling in and making sure that everybody has access to those spaces is incredibly important. And then also allowing for spaces of color in your spaces. So, one thing that Heather Ash has done is she created a space where we could have a people of color group. And then we could have, that space where there are people who have that same lived experience as we do. And it has been huge that it's been a place where we can find healing and we can come back into the collective and integrate that. And then number 6, I'm kind of speeding through because we're running out of time here. But the last one is see our beauty and not just our struggle. So it's really important that you do the work to learn the history of the struggles of people of color, but then also see our culture, see our art and our creators, and see our complexity and our beauty. Because when you can see that, then you can see our full humanity, and it opens up this space where you can start to hold space for the fact that we're all really beautiful humans living this experience, creating this dream together, and we all have so much to contribute. So for a quick reiteration, the 6 action steps you can take to uplift people of color in sacred spaces is: number 1, lift us into leadership. Number 2, don't speak for us, but let us have our voice. Number 3 is to do your own work. Number 4 is to resist cultural appropriation. Number 5 is to call in and hold space. And number 6 is to see our beauty, not just our struggle. Now, as we close out, we've got a couple of minutes here. I would like to invite you all to come back into that space that we created at the beginning of this workshop. So once again, either just being present, maybe closing your eyes, if that feels comfortable, and connecting to your breath. Bringing yourself back into that energetic space that we've created, where you can see the outlines of all of the participants here at summer camp. Taking a deep breath into the base of your belly, dropping in to sync with all of these energies. And imagining that above us all, there's a portal of light that's opening. And this light is warm and welcoming and inviting. And it's calling us to step foot into a new dimension, a reality of equity, a reality where everyone can be seen and heard for their beauty and everything that they bring to the stream. And feel into a world where everyone is being uplifted in our sacred spaces. And know that as we envision this world collectively, we are taking a quantum leap into a new reality, a reality of equity and of connection. And when you're ready, just opening your eyes, coming back into the space, and taking forward this new reality as we complete this beautiful weekend and into all of your sacred spaces beyond this one. Thank you so much for allowing me to use my voice to share my activism with you. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your Warrior Goddess Summer Camp weekend.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, CJ. Awesome session. So thank you so much for bringing all of your gifts to us. It was so good. Yummy, yummy, yum.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. All right. Campers, we have about a 15-minute break. And then we'll be back on with Mary Nicosia, and she'll be sharing with us with Mary. So, sending Toltec kisses to you, CJ. Kiss, kiss, kiss. And out to all of our campers. All right, everyone. We'll see you in about 15 minutes. And